Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in again as we continue through our course. So it's Thursday morning when I'm recording this, almost the end of week 2 from those 5 weeks, so moving pretty quickly. So we want to take stock of our due dates here, and then I'll walk us through a couple, a couple of the units looking ahead. So just to remind people of the kind of overall structure and sort of principle of the course is that once we get past that first introductions unit, we start doing kind of like component pieces of our composition course, thinking about like the shape of an essay or paragraph idea. In here we cover some material, again, sort of picking out the parts of an essay, whether it's the writing process or thesis statements, I should say. Getting into some of the research stuff like locating sources. And so it's not until really halfway, if not more, through our course that we put all those pieces together in our first essay. So it might feel like our first essay comes kind of late in the course, but hopefully you see that it's the product of us working through these kind of steps or stages and practicing them on kind of like a smaller scale before we put them all into place. And then honestly, we turn around right after that first essay, and of course you get feedback, right, returned to you. And then we begin our final essay, which unlike this essay, the first one, unfolds over a couple of units. Again, because we move so fast, it doesn't take many days, even though it's a number of units here. So it's a little bit more involved. It's not like it's all of a sudden 10 or 20 pages or something crazy, but a little bit more involved. So we have a few more steps. We have the opportunity to do some student conferencing, a peer exchange, which is a very focused, right, guided thing. You don't just exchange and hope for some decent feedback. And then you submit that final essay. So the essays don't really come until later in the course, but hopefully you understand why that is. So the other thing that's kind of related to that, and I've mentioned this before, is that most of the points for our course are in this first essay and then really stacked into the final essay. So we do a couple of other things right within these final essays, or within these final units, but it's fundamentally that last essay where all the points are. Really, again, reflecting the fact that that's where you're putting into practice all of the stuff that we've actually learned throughout the course, so it kind of makes sense. But it also means that, of course, you want to do well throughout these earlier units, but they are sort of, I don't want to say artificial, but obviously they're just like smaller units of work. So it's important to see how they're going to fit into that bigger picture. Otherwise, it can feel like you do a 10-point thing or even like a 50-point thing, and then you're done with it and you don't have to think about it. But it's really all practice towards putting it into place within those final essays. So again, keep that bigger picture in mind. Okay, due date-wise though, here we are Thursday, right, finishing up Unit 4. Then we turn around for Units 5 and 6 next week. So I'm going to take us into those units. And again, a lot of it is just working through kind of pieces of the overall essay or the writing process, right? And then looking towards building those into our first essay coming up in Units 7 and 8, kind of combined in our 5-week format. So here in Unit 4, we continue thinking about Sherman Alexie's flight patterns a little bit. We also look at a sample, one of our first sample student essays here. It's written about William Faulkner's famous short story, A Rose for Emily. And so the student essay isn't perfect by any means. And certainly some of the formatting stuff is not current anymore. But it gives us a good chance to see what our essays will ultimately be like, kind of like the scope of them, how they introduce an idea or how like a literary thesis works, how we support that with quotations from like a primary text, which in this case would be the story itself. And so, again, it's not perfect or ideal, but it does give us a good model to begin to see how all of those pieces might like fit together. There's a short quiz. Again, it's only like 10 points, so in and of itself, it's not super important. But what it does is draw your attention to some of the things going on in the essay that we'll want to duplicate for the kinds of essays that we write. Okay, so some stuff on thesis statements, right, which are obviously a really important part of our composition class. So again, this is like going to class. This is the course content you're learning. Obviously, if you don't get it, it's unclear, you can be in touch with me, but I'm assuming that people are taking the time to kind of read and process this. And this is why some of these earlier units they're kind of like easy and hard at the same time, because here we're talking about thesis statements just sort of in the abstract, the theory of them. You don't have to necessarily write one for our purposes right now. So it's easy to read this, right, and just kind of breeze through it. Okay, I got it. There's no real test on it until, of course, you have to write that essay and come up with your own thesis. And so that needs to reflect the kind of theory or the idea, the concept that we've covered here. So the unit is easy in that sense, but it doesn't mean that the concept is unimportant or won't be maybe challenging when you actually have to put it into the context of an essay. A little bit about writing process here. There's no one writing process that I can guarantee will work, but I find a lot of folks aren't really aware of what their process is. Even if it's just get assignment, try to write essay. That's your process. It's probably not as effective as it could be. One of the ironies, I think, is that because people want to work efficiently or quickly, they want to get to the writing of the essay as soon as possible. So it seems like adding steps to the process is just going to slow it down even more. But I would suggest to you that actually the opposite is true. Sometimes if we build in, especially some like planning stages, whether it's a rough outline or a kind of bubble diagram or just anything to get some basic ideas on paper so we can see them visually and how they kind of map out, we add steps, but we actually make the writing process more efficient and in the long run both quicker, less stressful because we're not trying to like manage everything just internally. We can actually see it on the page, and in most cases more successful. So literally you're getting a better grade because you've attended a little bit more to the writing process. And especially once you get into courses or essays or projects that are more involved maybe than the fairly focused ones we do here, you definitely want to have a process in place so you're not trying to just go from assignment to 10-page paper or whatever the case might be, because that's where it really gets almost impossible to try to do successfully. Quick reading from our textbook and quiz elements of the essay, again looking at those kind of component parts and thinking about them. And then a little exercise in close reading, some questions about the short story flight patterns that we've looked at and have been thinking about a little bit. Okay, so that's essay 4. Again, a lot of conceptual stuff, so sort of easy on that level, but certainly important for us to put into place, right, once we get to that first essay. Unit 5, a slightly more formal writing assignment, but again, just working on the paragraph level here, doing a sort of comparative analysis. We're going to read a new short story called Boys and Girls by Alice Munro in our textbook. A quick quiz, again, very low points, but designed to sort of draw your attention to some of the important things that are going on in this story, so almost like a reading guide, a study guide. The song called Just a Girl by the band No Doubt, kind of dated now a little bit, or at least from early in their career, although Gwen Stefani is still fairly prominent. There's some lyrics here, just in case you can't always make them out, but what you'll see is that there's a lot of overlap or thematic overlap between the short story and the video, so sort of a surprising parallel between these things that are very different in terms of the medium, right? One's a short story, one a song and video, different time periods they were created, like different contexts and all that kind of stuff, but some really surprising thematic and even visual parallels. The way that setting works in the story to communicate theme is a lot of what happens in the video too, which is good that we have the visual part of it. Okay, a real quick interruption here just to make sure everyone has a working library card, since we want to find that out now and not right up against a due date where you're trying to do something online. So if you're working remotely, so you're not on campus, and you're going to be using the databases that we have here access to through our library, you need a library card. And even if you have one or think you have one, they do expire. You have to renew them on a regular basis. So it's good to test that now, and like I said, not find out at the last minute up against a due date when you're trying to do something. So I'm going to scroll through this, and there's a little quiz you can barely see at the bottom. It's really not a quiz, it's just a check to make sure that you have that working library card. Okay, so here's the main assignment. The assignment is, again, just a paragraph level thing, so we don't need to write a whole big essay or multiple paragraphs. So we need to think about, how do I keep this concise? How do I simplify my language to make it as direct and immediate as possible? And what you're doing is drawing a parallel, a specific parallel between the story and the song, so a comparative paragraph. Again, important things for us to consider is laying out that thematic parallel really clearly in a topic sentence, supporting it with quotation from the short story and from the song, and we're just going to use sort of like the artificial time code type of thing to quote from the song. That's why we have the lyrics here, makes it a little bit easier. And so one of the things that you have to have here to be successful, and this is a good check for me, so we're 10 minutes into this video, so hopefully you're still with me. Your topic sentence for this kind of a paragraph should name both the story and the song and the idea or the thematic link between them. You don't want a topic sentence for this paragraph that just says something about the story and then you quote from the story, and then you say something about the song and quote from the song. That doesn't come across as a comparative paragraph. So if I'm seeing that kind of erroneous topic sentence that doesn't name both the story and the song in your paragraph, it tells me that either you haven't watched this, which is part of the course, or you have watched it but can't actually put that concept into practice. So again, the connection between what we learn here, going to class, and the assessment side, which in this case happens to be a brief paragraph, is really pretty direct. There's no mystery or more real magic to it. And I'm trying to go quickly because I'm covering a lot of ground here. So that's Unit 5. Unit 6, I'm going to cover here since it's kind of the last piece of the puzzle before we get into our essay. We have a bunch of new stories to choose from. I'm asking you to read at least one of them. You can always just go in and read a paragraph or two, and if you like it, great. If not, try a different one. There's lots of variety here. So here we're putting into place one of the most important pieces of our puzzle for English 1102, sometimes called the research course, working with what are called secondary, or sometimes they're called critical, but doesn't mean that they're negative necessarily, sources. So for our purposes, and again, I want to clarify that what we're doing here is specific to our kind of writing. We're only going to use material that is secondary sources that are relevant and appropriate. So those two words are kind of touchstones for us here, and what they mean for our context is something that's appropriate means that it's coming from one of the COD databases. That's again why we make sure everyone has a library card so you can access those. So it doesn't mean that web sources are always bad or that Wikipedia is bad or anything like that necessarily. But part of what we're trying to practice here is using a slightly different kind of set of research sources. So I'm forcing you basically to use the databases and not just do a random kind of Google search. So that's the appropriate part, from the database. The relevant part means that your source is a direct discussion of the primary text. So what you'll notice in a lot of these stories, like The Lesson or Araby, for example, is they're sort of like coming-of-age stories. So what we wouldn't want to find, or what would be an inappropriate source for our purposes here, would be something that we found, even if it's in a database, but let's say it's on child psychology or child development. So it's like tangentially, kind of thematically, sort of related to what's going on in the stories, but it's not a direct discussion of that particular story. So one of the reasons, again, that we use the databases, and I point you to two specific ones here, is that they just contain material that is a direct discussion of any of these stories. And that's exactly kind of what we're looking for. So the unit here, Unit 6, is probably the easiest one we have to do, since all you're doing is finding a source on one of these stories and giving us a little brief discussion board post report on it. It's all kind of laid out here. It really doesn't take that much time, but it's super important that we understand now what constitutes an appropriate and relevant source for us, because obviously we're going to turn around from here, whoops, let me go into the due dates instead, and put all of these pieces, especially this last one, into place in our first essay, all right? So when we come to that essay, what am I looking for? I'm looking for the application of all the conceptual stuff that we've covered, whether it's appropriate relevant sources, effective topic sentences, effective thesis statements, and you'll see that built into Unit 7 here, or the essay assignment, isn't just the unit, but there's a bunch more sample essays that we'll look through, again, just to sort of like get your ear used to the kind of essay that we're writing. And then there's the invitation here to look through a couple of samples. Again, they're not all perfect by any means, but they do give you a sense of the scope, the style, the tone, right, the way that our kind of essay is going to work, and I think that's really helpful. Okay, so that was a crash course through our next units coming up. Hopefully that kind of covers things, at least until we get to that essay. And as always, if you have questions, concerns, you can be in touch with me and I'll get right back to you.